One of the writers on the papacy, Peter de Rosa, he wrote that John the 23rd was the first pope to call a council when there was no pressure on him to do so. The church was not in a state of revolt. There was no dogmatic questions outstanding. And John wanted to, he created a buzzword for Vatican II. In Italian, aggiornamento. He wanted to update the church. He wanted to bring it into the 20th century, if you will. So out of the fullness of being Pope, he calls a council. And he urges the world, especially since the Vatican administrators, okay, and you're all administrators of some sort, the Vatican administrator, and you spoke of today of, I forget what the word was, you had two differences of opinion going on in a meeting, you know, and you got to hear the other side. And John heard the other side as much as he could, but he encouraged us, the church, not to heed the prophets of doom or gloom. If they're going to sound that way, don't pay attention to them. We have to give the Holy Spirit a chance. Power, Richard Rohr says, is the capacity to establish and maintain a relationship with people or with things, if you will. Let me go back to Claire. She and her sister Agnes were very close. I have a brother and a sister younger than me. I left home at 14 to go into seminary system. My sister and my brother are younger. They're very close with each other. I'm kind of on the periphery because I never lived with them that long. Okay? But when I want to know something from one, I ask the other. And I usually get eventually something back from one of them about what's going on. But they're very close. Claire and Agnes were very, very close. Agnes was not a happy camper when Francis sent her up to Monticelli near Florence. So she writes her sister a letter. Now listen to one little paragraph of the letter that she sends her sister. And she's the abbess up there. She wrote, "You should know that my soul and body suffer, that I'm burdened and tormented beyond measure, and I'm almost incapable of speaking because I have been physically separated from you and my sisters, with whom I had hoped to live and die in this world. This distress has a beginning and it knows no end." She says to Claire, "I believed," when she entered with Claire, "that our life and our death would be one, just as our manner of life in heaven would be one, and that we who have one and the same flesh and blood would be buried in the same grave." Then she says to Claire, "But I see that I have been deceived." She calls her sister a liar. Hello? You know Jeremiah the prophet? "You duped me, and he says to God, "You duped me, and I let myself be duped." She's saying to her sister, "I've been deceived. I have been restrained. I've been abandoned, and I've been afflicted on every side. You put me up here in a mess." And she wasn't happy. But the relationship could sustain the truth. She doesn't return to her sister till a few months before she dies in 1253, from 1219. She only has a few months with her sister and dies shortly after her sister dies. But yet they were so close, if you will, in the relationship that they could be that honest with each other. I thought of trust today when somebody put that up about the way of working with one another. Mary Ann Cope. She was first invited to Hawaii to care for the children of lepers at Oahu. And she was doing that really well. Now, you know the name Saint Damien of Belgium? Damien, who was working with the lepers at Molokai at Kalapapa. And Damien catches the disease. And Damien is dying. And he sends Mary Ann a note, "Please come and care for my lepers. I'm dying." She says to the other 5 sisters who went out there with her, "I'm going to go. You don't have to come. But if you come, you will never catch leprosy." The promise I mentioned to you already. And all the sisters join her. They get out there before Damien dies, and at that time when you went out there, you were stuck there because you were felt then to be contagious, which is not true today, of course, but you were felt to be contagious. And let me just quote to you from her biography. Marianne, together with her sisters, notice the expression, Marianne, together with her sisters, rolled up her sleeves and swept, washed, and scrubbed the entire facility. Planted trees, flowers, shrubs, vegetables where they could, and the patients began to warm up to them, to begin to trust them, and they cherished the sisters. The power of relationship took root from the beginning, and Marianne began to call the patients her children. She still struggled, as Francis struggled, with leprosy. There is an odor from the disease. I don't know if you've ever been near lepers. I've been with lepers twice in my life. There is an odor from the disease. And if Francis used to say, the sight of lepers nauseated him, let alone the smell. And one of the sources says he could smell them at a couple of miles. I don't believe that, but that's what the source says. He could smell them from a distance. And Marianne, in her biography, they quoted her as saying, I suffer when I go to church and smell the sight of lepers is disagreeable. How glad I was to get outside again and breathe fresh air. We met many of our old patients outside. All of them want to shake hands, something that still makes me shudder, but yet we do it. So it was something she struggled with. Think of when AIDS first raised its head for us. We have a similar experience in our own time, if you will. But she echoes Francis, who says in his testament, it was bitter for me to see lepers, but the Lord led me among them, and that which was bitter to me changed into sweetness of soul and body. The poet Robert Louis Stevenson stopped at Molokai, somewhere near them, and he saw what the sisters were doing for the lepers, if you will. And he said, in their presence, even a fool is silent and adores. What he saw the women doing. John the 23rd. From the folklore that's grown up around John the 23rd, he was an incredible person with relating to people. We have the same example in Pope Francis. I mean, he's not a pope more than a year and a half right now. And you can see there's absolutely no person in the world that doesn't know about this guy. I was sitting in an airport at LaGuardia, and there was a guy sitting next to me. I said to him, are we delayed? He said, yeah, delayed about an hour, blah. And he says, what do you do? I'm a priest. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, you're Pope Francis. Great guy. And he started quoting one of the things Francis did. And we're getting on the plane, he said, by the way, I'm a Jew. And I like him. But you begin to see the appeal that a person who relates to others has. This is a form of power, Richard Rohr says. Let me give you some of his examples. When a pope's elected, you leave the Sistine Chapel, they take you to a little room where there's a tailor. And they always have their 3 white cassocks, small, medium, and large. When John walked in, he said to the tailor, you better give me all 3. The night of his election, the crowd would not leave the square. They wouldn't go home. Okay? So he said to the people, it was late, about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, they're calling from down in the piazza, Papa, Papa, Papa Giovanni. So they opened the windows, he got the mic, he says, you know, the new pope has to eat. I'm hungry. Hungry, he was huge. Okay? He says, now, I'm throwing you a kiss. Now, listen to him. I'm throwing you a kiss. Bring that home to your bambini. Kiss them. Tell them the bacio is from the Pope. Okay? And now the Pope is going to go to meal. He makes the sign of the cross, and he left. They applauded and went home. His first Christmas in 58. After they did all the ceremonies for Christmas, he didn't want to stay locked in the Vatican. He told his driver, get the car, we're going out. And the driver, give me a second. Yeah, By the way, the driver's still alive. And there's a couple of incidents he's related even now that have happened with John. He told the driver, get the car. He said, they'll never let us out. He said, get the car. So he got the car, and he told them, drive around in circles. So they drove in circles, and after a while, the people watching them got bored, then he went out the gate. He went to the local prison, Regina Coeli, the local prison nearby. And he enters and the prisoners are there. And on Christmas Day, he says, since you couldn't come to see me, I came to see you. Then he noticed some prisoners behind bars they wouldn't let out. He says, let them out. The Pope has to talk to them. So they opened the gates and let the prisoners out. And that Christmas, same Christmas, he went to play with the children in the Children's Hospital of Bambino Gesù. He went to play with them at Christmas. They must have thought he was Babbo Natale, their Santa Claus. I mean, he was so rotund, if you will. There's also a protocol that when the Pope walks in the Vatican Gardens, you can't bother him. You're supposed to just do your work and so forth. And John used to walk every day, and he's walking one day, and the guy's near a flower bed. He's bending over, and the Pope sees him. So he boots him in the rear end. He says, get up and talk to the Pope. So the guy got up, they became friends, and I think he lived in the Vatican with his wife in a little hut. John used to go back there to drink homemade wine. Hello. Incredible stories. Another one, you remember from years past, they used to have a papal throne that men carried, so that the Pope could be seen above the crowd, so that everybody could see him. And so the first time he gets on this throne, he calls his secretary over, and he says to the secretary, double their salaries because I'm double Pius's weight. Just great stuff. But relating to people. They loved him for it. And he was, at that time, our First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, was going to visit him. She spoke the Romance languages. She spoke Italian. Okay? He didn't know English, so he didn't know how to greet her. Is he going to say, Madame President, Mrs. Kennedy, whatever? He didn't know. He's practicing back and forth. He didn't know what to do. As he's thinking about it, they open the door. She walks in. He goes, Jacqueline. I mean, just the warmth of the guy. The warmth of the guy, if you will. On April 16, 1959, he's Pope just a few months. He does his first canonization. It was a Franciscan friar, St. Charles of Setzi, whose tomb is in the church. I don't know if any of you went to the church of San Francesco a Ripa in Rome. A little church. Charles of Setzi is buried there. And all the friars were there for the canonization, and he addressed them. He was very proud to be a secular Franciscan. I wrote an article, I hope it came out in a couple of places already, on he as secular Franciscan. Very proud of this. Said it through his whole life. And he turned to the Franciscan gathering there. He said to them in Italian, I am Joseph, your brother. He's Angelo Joseph Roncalli. And he entered the secular Franciscans at age 13. Power is the freedom to give myself away. Marriage ceremonies today still have that carryover. Who's going to give the bride away? Do you have that? No.
Yes.
You do? It's on the East Coast. I know. It must be here. Usually it's the father of the family that gives the bride away. I hate the expression, but that's what it is. And I mentioned to you that Claire's family of 7 knights, they had 3 young girls that was going to give them 3 more military marriages that would set them up with 3 more knights. So they were getting ready to betroth each of these girls. Claire, and we know from the process of canonization, one of the guys that tried to date her, they went to him to get information about her holiness, because he was trying to date her. And he said, every time I went to date her, she used to tell me, why don't you go join the brothers? She didn't want to date him. She did not want to marry, if you will. So they, if you will, if I can quote the first letter to St. Agnes of Prague that Clare wrote, when she tells Agnes in 1234, she writes this letter. She says to Agnes, and Agnes was literally a princess, the daughter of King Ottokar. Her brother Wenceslaus becomes also the king of I don't know if at that time it's the Czech Republic, but of Prague, if you will. She writes to Agnes and Agnes kept herself away from betrothals. Excuse me, she didn't. They betrothed her from age 4. and at age 4, she had to go live with the family of the betrothed. And her intended husband-to-be died at age 6 or 10.
Oh.
So she comes back to her family. They tried to betroth her 2 more times. She said, I don't want it anymore. Okay? And Clare writes to Agnes and says, and you gave yourself away to a spouse of more noble lineage, namely the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, for women to do this in the 13th century, today I can see the assertiveness, and thank God it happens, where women are standing up for who they are. But in the 13th century, it didn't happen. Just didn't happen. But Clare and St. Agnes, up in Prague, and by the way, Clare's sister Agnes is also a saint. So we have 2 St. Agneses, one in Assisi and one in Prague. Let me just give you a little Marianne Cope on the ability to give oneself away. When she went to Hawaii, just a cute little thing, when they first left the convent in Syracuse, New York, I think they got all the way to Rochester, and Mother Marianne said, I forgot my purse. So she had to go back to Rochester. She had, I think, the money and everything else is in the purse. She had to go back to get her purse. And she said she was going to Hawaii to bring the sisters. She was provincial, and then she'll return back to New York to continue being provincial. But the king and queen of Hawaii at that time knew that she never would return. Remember, Hawaii's not a state in the 19th century. It becomes a state in 1958. So it's not a state way back when, if you will. But the king and queen of Hawaii knew that she was going to stay there. And she does give herself away to that new place and that new work, if you will, with the lepers. The 2 of them. Now, people are saying, and by the way, they didn't pose for that. Let me say it's a postcard. That was out in Rome for the canonization. A postcard. And people are saying that Francis is the new John the 23rd. He's got a lot of overtones to John the 23rd. A lot that Francis is and has done and stands for, if you will. Now, let me just finish with John the 23rd to give himself away. John the 23rd, in 1962, in October 11, 1962, when the Second Vatican Council opened with its first session, he was fully aware he had stomach cancer. And he was told he was not going to last very long, if you will. Peter de Rosa, this Jesuit who lived in England, wrote that Pope John was 81 years old when on a marvelous October morning in 1962, he was carried in on that throne into St. Peter's, his face wet with tears. Never had the papacy been in so high public esteem. And if all popes were like him, it was said, people would be lining up to be Catholic. In his opening address, he made it plain that the church was not to heed the prophets of doom. The church had to update herself radically and without fear. The Cold War of the churches, as far as Rome was concerned, was finished. There were to be no condemnations, but instead a return to the gospel of the Master, Jesus Christ. In his short papacy, they're saying that there's so many overtones to Pope John the 23rd. And Andrea, this morning, she took a little thunder out of my final quote here because you quoted the same thing that I want to quote. And I don't know if you got it from the same book I read. But I read one of Francis's biographies. And they quote Francis saying this about authority and power. He says, let us never forget that authentic power is service. Authentic authority, power, is service. And the Pope, too, when exercising power, which is what I'm trying to talk about, the Pope, too, when exercising power, must enter ever more fully into that service which has its culmination in the cross. If you're going to use power, you're going to be put on the cross. And if you don't expect the cross, you're in the wrong job. If you do have a cross, by the way, in ministry, please know you're on the right track. Well, it sounds like you want to smile at it. There's no way to Easter Sunday. There's no way except through the cross. Bonaventure says in the opening of his famous writing, The Journey of the Human Person into God, he said there's no other way to make the journey into God except through the burning love of the crucified. If you're not ready to be nailed, we don't use that expression, I got nailed. Right? At a meeting, I got nailed. We say, I was thrown under the bus. Maybe that's a modern crucifixion. But if that happens, you know you're doing your job. Hello? So he says, the Pope says, the cross. He said the Pope must be inspired by lowly, concrete, faithful service. And the Pope must open his arms to embrace with tender affection. Notice the motherly words. Tender affection. The whole of humanity. Especially the poorest, the weakest, the least important. And for what I listened to this morning, that's what your ministries seem to be involving yourselves with. And that makes me very proud of my sisters. We're a Franciscan family. I'm very proud of my sisters and what they do and have done. A few weeks after his election, the Vatican newspaper called Osservatore Romano reported that the former secretary of John the 23rd, his name is Cardinal Loris Francis Capovilla, had called Pope Francis to say, this was last year, okay, that last June 3rd of 2013 was going to be the 50th anniversary of John's death. And the cardinal called the Pope, and the Pope didn't take the call at first, called him back, and they were chit-chatting, and he said, they were talking about John the 23rd, and Pope Francis concluded his conversation with Cardinal Capovilla by saying about Pope John the 23rd, I see him with the eyes of my heart. I see him with the eyes of my heart. That's some of my thoughts about authority and power